Hello, friends, and welcome to this edition of Coming In for a Landing. I am your host, Paul Hudrick, and I have another very special guest on this week's edition, and that is my teammate at 97.3 ESPN, Kevin McCormick. Does a hell of a job covering the Sixers. Kevin, appreciate you coming on, man.
All the time, man. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we're going to get into a lot of stuff. Obviously, a couple games in Tampa against the Raptors. They win the first game against the Raptors on the road since the Doug Collins era as a coach, not a player. Just wanted to clarify that. So we definitely want to get into some of the issues there. Maybe talk a little bit about where we think maybe some of the weaknesses lie on the roster and then where they could maybe look to strengthen it as the trade deadline comes closer and closer. But I want to start with All-Star because East and Western Conference named their reserves as voted by the NBA coaches. Ben Simmons in, Tobias Harris out. Doc Rivers told us last night that he called other coaches, which I was actually curious. Like, does he call and lobby other coaches for his guys? And he said, yes, he does. He did that for Ben Simmons and Tobias Harris. And most of the coaches he talked to said, why do you even feel the need to do this for Ben Simmons? So I guess my question is to you, Kevin, like, do you think that in a weird way, Philadelphia is tougher on Ben Simmons than maybe the rest of the world is?
I feel like part of that's just because when we get to watch him night in and night out, and some people may say it's a blessing, some people may say it's a curse, just because he definitely is one of those superstars who can be frustrating at times, although lately he's been phenomenal. But in terms of the lobbying, I think it was kind of shocking to hear him say he was lobbying about Ben, because even though Ben had a slow start of the season statistic wise, I always felt he was going to end up being an all-star. I felt like his spot was always safe, just because when you look league wide and teams think about the Sixers, they instantly think Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid. Like, he's still up there in the conversation of like that key franchise cornerstone for this team. So seeing them dominate and be at the top of the Eastern Conference all year, it pretty much figured that they were going to get two all-stars, and Ben was always going to be that second spot. So it was more for me just that fringe of if Tobias Harris was going to be able to squeak in or not.
Yeah, I have to say that I have to toot our own horn at 97.3. I feel like between myself, you, and Jason Blevins, we were all pretty balanced about Ben Simmons kind of, quote unquote, struggling early. We all were kind of like, okay, like, let's give him a little time, coming off a knee surgery, new coach, new players. Like, let's, yeah, he still, he was still playing all world defense at that point. The scoring necessarily wasn't there, but he was still putting up big assist numbers. He was still doing a lot of little things to help the team win, which is, to your point, why they were the number one seed in the Eastern Conference. Yes, Joel Embiid is having an MVP caliber season, no-brainer starter all-star, but Ben Simmons was the co-pilot. I mean, he has been there all along. So yeah, I tend to agree that I especially with the recent weeks and how well he's been playing recently, I thought there was no way he wasn't going to make it. And it's, like you said, Tobias Harris, that was the one I was debating on. So then that kind of leads me into, what do you think with Tobias was? Would you consider him a snub? Would you just consider it a numbers game? Like, when you hear the news that Tobias Harris is not an all-star, what do you think?
I think he can definitely be put in that snub conversation, but snubbed for the right reason, I guess, would be how I would start it off. Just because I think it's very tough to be named an all-star when you're looked at as the quote-unquote third guy in the operation. Like I said earlier, how Joel and Ben are looked at as the two that run the show, and Tobias is kind of that peg under them. So I think it's very tough to get three all-stars unless you're the Hawks that one year where they somehow managed to get four. And just although the Sixers have been at the top of the Eastern Conference all season, they haven't really had a vice grip on the conference. There's still a lot of teams that are kind of in the mix right there with them and not that far behind. So I think with them being in first but not really having a commanding lead, they were in a very tough spot to get that third all-star, and just being a third option on one team and being named an all-star over a first option of another team like a Nikola Vucevic on a Magic team that might not be doing as well. I think it's just Tobias was just caught between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, I probably agree with you that snub is probably strong. It's probably a strong term to say that he was snubbed. But for me, I think he should have made it. And you just mentioned Vucevic, and yes, he is a very good player on a very bad team, and his numbers are up this year. But again, keeping it in perspective, his numbers are up because that team's banged up and they're not very good. So that's the result of why. I mean, they're 14th in the conference. I think if the Orlando Magic didn't have an all-star this year, no one would have been in an uproar about it. I personally, I thought it was going to come down to Tobias and Middleton. And I thought maybe Tobias had a shot because when you look at him and Middleton's numbers, they are very, very close. Now, if I'm just looking at it as a poor basketball player, yes, I do think that Chris Middleton is a better basketball player overall than Tobias Harris. But I just think it's Tobias, like the durability. When you have Joel Embiid, who like, and I don't want to take anything away from the guy. He is, to me, the front runner for the MVP of this league. He has been phenomenal, but he does miss time because they are, more considerate of his injuries as opposed to maybe some other players around the league. Rightfully so, given his injury history and that he is a 7-footer. I am on board with that. But when you do that load management, when you are worried about that, you need reliable players. And I think Tobias fits that category of a guy who he doesn't miss any games. His defense, I think, has improved exponentially from at least from when he first got here. It's not even like the same player. He's been so much better on that end. When you look at the efficiency numbers, I kind of, and I guess in a weird way, I thought maybe it was like what am I thinking? Like a career, it's like a lifetime achievement award kind of thing. Like the guy probably should have made it 2 years ago out West, and that was maybe a stronger snub. But this year, he's on the best team in the Eastern Conference. I personally thought he should have made it. But like you said, I think snub's probably strong, but in my personal opinion, thought he should have made it. And now I want to get into the games against the Raptors. Two ugly games. They come out with a split. First one, a loss. Then they win last night. No Seth Curry, but Furkan Korkmaz decides to go nuts in the first quarter after he had hit one shot in the last month. Then he just goes bananas in the first quarter. And listen, that really set the precedent for the game. Him shooting, they were pretty much comfortably in the lead for the majority of this game. A little sketchy at the end with some really weird, bad decision making by Danny Green, among others. Throwing cross-court passes for some reason. I don't know why. But overall, I thought they really controlled that game, especially on the defensive end of the floor. I thought they were great. I guess for you, what were the biggest takeaways when you look at the two games? Obviously, Toronto does a better job than anyone against Joel Embiid. Really, really shut him down better than anyone has by far this season. So taking away those two games, what are kind of your biggest takeaways as far as maybe how this affects the Sixers for the rest of the season?
I think game two showed that game one was definitely a winnable game and arguably a game that the Sixers win on a normal night. Just because when you look at the game one loss, the two things that really stood out were poor 3-point shooting and just a lack of production from the bench, which is something the Sixers have been able to overcome in the past. But just the poor 3-point shooting, yeah, I bet we will. And the poor 3-point shooting is just, you get caught on a bad night. Everyone says it's a make or miss league. So Tobias Harris doesn't go 1 for 8 from 3 every night. Seth Curry had a rough night shooting as well. Shake Milton got some to go, but I believe he was 3 of 7 from deep as well. As a team, they shot just under 30%. So they typically don't shoot that bad, and I think it was more just they didn't knock down open shots in game one. And in game two, you did see them come out, knock down open shots, whether it was Furkan Korkmaz just absolutely going berserk, finally breaking out of his slump. Danny Green was very nice as well. But yeah, it's just the 3-point shooting. And then the other thing is kind of how you touched on about Embiid. The Raptors were the first team all year to arguably make Joel Embiid look mortal. But what's interesting was in game one, it didn't look like the traps and double teams faced him as much. And he made a lot of correct reads in dishing the ball and was able to generate open looks off those double teams. But in game two, it really looked like the traps and double teams faced him a lot more. So I thought it was interesting because I feel like if there was a time to adapt, he would have improved from game two to game one, not necessarily regressed in a sense.
I think that's a very fair assessment because the goal is to, one, just not allow him to touch the basketball as much as possible. And if he does, to get it out of his hands immediately. And then the other part of that is just to frustrate the hell out of him. And I think, to your point, he got frustrated in the last game. I thought that led to some poor decisions on his part, maybe forcing some things that, he hasn't been forcing this year. And it could have been as simple as a result of, they don't make 3-pointers in the first game. They really don't shoot the basketball well. So maybe he gets a sense of in the second game, okay, well, maybe I had to fight through this because we weren't hitting. But I thought, again, they were up double digits throughout a good chunk of that game, and it was with Joel Embiid struggling. So I think it's a matter of, I think he had to take, and I thought in the second half he was better than the first half, but it's a matter, I think, of him just kind of taking a deep breath, not allowing it to frustrate him. I get it. It's frustrating when you are that good. You're coming off a 50-point game, and then the next two games for someone to basically do what they did, which was Nick Nurse said, I dare anyone else on this roster to beat me. The gamble paid off in game one, did not pay off in game two. And I don't think, for me, I really don't think it's a strategy that can work against the Sixers throughout the season, because I do think the Sixers have other players that can beat you. Ben Simmons, when he's on, he can beat you. Tobias Harris, he was really good last night. Just a solid all-around game. Seth Curry on any given night can get really hot, and they have other guys, Danny Green, Furkan Korkmaz, Shake Milton, guys who can on a given night get hot. They just got to find the right balance there. So I don't think, yes, I think it's the right strategy because Joel Embiid is just playing so well. I think the strategy is just take the ball out of his hands. But I do think that the Sixers have a team that can beat it, that can overcome it. With that said, I think the one glaring thing you and I can agree is that this bench just is not deep enough and just frankly not getting the job done. You see every night the starters are all in the plus and the bench guys are all in the minus. So I guess for you, what do you see as the biggest weakness? Like what do you think is happening when the bench comes in? What do you think are the biggest issues?
I think we just had a really tough time of creating good offensive looks, especially with Shake Milton now. Now that he's been back, that duty has been lessened a little bit with his ability to put the ball on the floor and create, but just those lineups just really struggle. It feels like even when Shake Milton was out, the only offense the second unit could generate was a Tyrese Maxey floater or Dwight Howard catching a lob or catching an offensive rebound, and that's just not sustainable. It's starting to look like the Sixers teams of past, where the starters would come out, set the tone early, and the bench would come in and just completely blow that lead. And it's a shame because at the beginning of the year, when I was looking at this roster, I was very impressed with the second unit, and I thought that the Sixers had a lot of playable guys. And even Doc Rivers said that he felt this bench could win games for them at times. And it's just they've been in a really bad cold spell. I think the lineups that involve Ben Simmons, Matisse Thybulle, and Dwight Howard just do not function properly from a spacing standpoint, and they could really benefit from another guard who could put the ball on the floor and create alongside Shake Milton, and an upgrade of a big who can shoot, because Mike Scott just hasn't played well at all this season.
No, it's a two excellent points, and I agree. Shot creator, that's been my number one thing for this team. Whether it's a shot creator to add to the starting lineup or a shot creator to come off the bench, you just need more. You need a guy that can just put the ball on the floor and beat somebody off the dribble. And unfortunately, I think to your point with the second unit, that was Tyrese Maxey. He was the only guy that could do it. And because he is a 20-year-old rookie and the only guy that could do it, it was a disaster. And I agree that with that, when it's Matisse, when it's Ben Simmons, when it's Dwight Howard, it's not a good recipe. It's not a good mix. And a stretch five would go a long way, or a shot creator, or both. I mean, really, if I'm Daryl Morey, I'm looking for both. When I was on with Gil earlier, that's what I said is like, it's not about getting guys. You're not going to play all of them. It's about getting guys and having options, having flexibility, so that when Dwight Howard is getting killed by Chris Boucher, you can tweak things so that you don't have to put Dwight Howard out there. You can put a stretch five guy in and change things up. And I think that's the bigger thing, to have those kind of puzzle pieces. And speaking of which, I definitely want to touch on some trade stuff. The big rumor, the big name has been Kyle Lowry recently. I don't see why the Toronto Raptors would trade him, considering where they are in the conference, considering his stature with the team. But Masai Ujiri is not a guy who sits on his hands. He definitely isn't afraid to make bold moves. Maybe he wants to go young. They've been playing well without Lowry. He has missed some time. So, maybe that's a move where you can you can offer them a move that tempts them to maybe move in a different direction. But I guess, we'll start there. We'll start with Lowry, kind of how you view him. One, as, in a trade, whether that you think that's a possibility, whether you think there is the right pieces the Sixers have to get it done. And then from a basketball standpoint, kind of where you see his fit.
I'm kind of out on Kyle Lowry strictly from a monetary perspective, just because with him making $30 million, it's going to be very tough for the Sixers to match that from a money standpoint. And that's even just adding guys like Danny Green, Mike Scott, Tony Bradley. And when you look at that, none of those guys are guys that are really going to interest Toronto. So that's just meeting it from a salary matching standpoint. You still have to tack on things that are going to continue to interest them and make them want to give up Kyle Lowry, whether it's a Tyrese Maxey or a Matisse Thybulle. And I don't know if I'm giving up either of those guys for a potential rental on Kyle Lowry. So although I do feel he does bring that winning aspect, he's a pest, he's great at drawing fouls and stuff like that would enhance in the postseason. And like we said, he's another guard who could put the ball on the floor and score. But I don't know if going after a Kyle Lowry would be the best use of the Sixers assets that they have right now.
I disagree. Because listen, I just think Kyle Lowry, you add him to, so like I agree with you in the regards of the monetary stuff. Like, yeah, that's going to be really tough because I'm a nerd and I'm on Trade Machine like every freaking day. And it would take Danny Green, Mike Scott, Tony Bradley, Terrence Ferguson. Those would have to be the 4 contracts you would have to, that was be the only way you can make his salary match. So to your point about, you can't include a Thybulle or a Maxey, even if you'd want to. So it's draft compensation. So now it's how much you want to give up for a 35-year-old, soon to be 35-year-old, soon to be free agent. How much do you really want to give up? Is it a first-round pick? Is it 2 first-round pick? Every GM is going to have their walking away point. I don't know what it would be for me, but for me, I would love to have him in the fray because I think of the idea of Kyle Lowry's now. So let's just say you pull the trigger, right? Kyle Lowry's in your starting lineup. Then I think it gives you options too, because maybe you don't want to start Kyle Lowry and Seth Curry in the same backcourt because of size. Lowry does play much bigger than 6 foot because, like you said, he draws charges. He's tough. He's big. He's not afraid to stick his nose in there. So he does play bigger than that 6 foot height. But you could theoretically maybe bump Shake Milton up in the starting lineup, bring Seth Curry off your bench. Maybe that mixes things up. You add, and then you had even more ball handling to the starting 5, and you give a little firepower to the bench by bringing a guy like Seth Curry off of it, and maybe that allows you to maybe match up better defensively. So I think there's an opportunity there. Plus, so let's say that theoretical trade happens, and you're giving up draft picks, obviously. But you still have your trade exception from the Al Horford deal, which is around $8 million. So you still have that at your disposal. Maybe you pair that with a 2nd-round pick and you get, a stretch 5 with that. Then plus you still have your taxpayer mid-level exception, which you can use on a buyout guy, maybe like a JJ Redick. And so I think even if you make the move for Kyle Lowry, I think you would still have enough at your disposal to make other things work and to make other upgrades. Now, listen, again, like I have a walking away point. Am I giving up like 3 first-round picks for Kyle Lowry? No, that's too much. 2, might even be a little too rich. A 1 and a 2, you might be talking. I think I would probably pull the trigger on that with that package of players. I would probably do that and then use those empty roster spots that would create to bring in, again, a guy on a trade exception, a guy in a buyout market. I think there's something there. You can make all of that work. Is there anybody for you that just really sticks out? A guy that you say, yes, like 100%, this guy would improve the bench, and it's a guy that seems really attainable.
Has been my name that I've had circled for weeks now, just because, like we've talked about, how you said the puzzle pieces of the bench and making that work. I think if you have a guy like PJ Tucker, who is a guy that you could play at power forward next to Dwight Howard to open the floor a little bit, or you could also play as a small ball 5 and open up the floor for Ben. So I think adding him, he's known for his defensive skills, so he fits into that defensive mantra that the Sixers have been focusing on to build. And I think he would just be a nice fit of a floor spacer, a guy stick in the corner, operate around. And then in terms of a shot creator, I don't know what it would take to get it done, but if you could somehow poach Lou Williams from the Clippers and bring him here, I think him and Shake Milton in the backcourt together, I think the 2 of them would be looking in the mirror in a sense, but they'd give you 2 combo guards who could put the ball on the floor, score in a myriad of ways, and would just be a very nice boost for that second unit that just desperately needs scoring from somewhere.
I love the Lou Williams pick, but you know what? Again, that would be a situation where maybe I would consider moving Shake into the starting lineup and playing him and Seth together, and then have Danny Green and Lou Williams as your backcourt. I mean, that would be a pretty good experienced veteran backcourt. You get a little defense with Danny Green, you get the offense with Lou Williams. So there might be something there. And his role has dwindled a little bit in LA. I'm not, I'm sure they're not eager to move him, but if you could offer the right things, they might take him. They might make that work. So yeah, I think Lou Williams would be a great fit. I know George Hill and DeLon Wright have been guys that have been discussed. I'll tell you, man, either one of those guys for the right price, I would do in a heartbeat. Because, adding, again, a guy that can create a shot, create his own offense. And I think it just gives you more versatility, more depth. PJ Tucker's an outstanding name. I mean, PJ, and that's a guy that you could sneak in under that trade exception. Maybe you throw Houston a couple second-round picks. Man, he would just be such a great fit. Like you said, to space the floor next to Dwight, or if you're caught in a matchup against a guy like a Chris Boucher, you throw PJ at that small ball 5 and you make it work. And I just love I kind of have this vision now of like, you get Kyle Lowry and then you still get PJ Tucker, and just think about those two, adding those two guys who are just absolute bulldogs who just will do anything it takes to win. And just the kind of what they would bring to the table from that standpoint, I think would just make the team better. Not to mention the fact that they can play. They're both very good. That's it. Kyle Lowry is still playing at a really high level. We look at his numbers. He's still shooting the ball really well. He's still creating his own offense. He's scoring plenty of points. He's still creating offense for others. He rebounds really well for a smaller guard too. So, I mean, there's just a lot to like. Anyone else that you can think of? Any other guy that's like, Lou Williams is kind of like you said, that's maybe I wouldn't say a pipe dream, but a guy that maybe is a little bit tougher to get. Is there a guy that you would like to see, maybe someone who might only cost you maybe like a second-round pick and the trade exception or something like that?
I don't know, maybe Thad Young. I'm more focused on the bench just because another thing with the Kyle Lowry thing is if you acquire him, then the whole conversation becomes what do you do with the starting lineup? And you talked about the size factor of pairing him and Seth together. And I think putting him in the starting lineup, if you have to play him with Seth, limits the versatility of what you could do with Ben Simmons defensively. And at the end of the day, when you look at the Sixers, the starting lineup's fine. I mean, I don't know if I'm ready to throw a wrench in that with the success they've seen. And if you use all your assets on Kyle Lowry, you're rolling the dice to figure out the end of the bench that will still be very thin. So I think when you look at their assets as a whole, between draft compensation, all those tradable contracts at the end of the bench, the trade exception, and the MLE, like you mentioned earlier, Daryl Morey really could potentially reshape this entire bench. With all those assets, you could go get 2 to 3 guys who can really round out this rotation and make it look whole, or go for the splash of Kyle Lowry. I think it's more where you stand on if you want to go all in or not, but I'm still in the camp of I'm more for watching the Sixers smooth out their edges in terms of fixing the bench and acquiring guys that just make the whole puzzle show the picture, as opposed to just throwing a wrench in everything and trying to push all in with a Kyle Lowry. And I hate to say it, I don't even know if I want to push all in just because of what's going on in the world right now. We've already seen a couple teams get depleted because of COVID and health and safety protocols. We don't know what things are going to look like come playoff time. So I don't know if this is the year to go all in, just because if you get one positive test within your organization at the wrong time, it could completely ruin your playoff hopes. So, I mean, it's all still a big question mark. So I think if there was a year to just smooth out your edges and go for a good run this year, and then you have all that cap flexibility and you give Daryl a full year to really show what he could do with this team, I think long view in mind, that might be the better avenue than pushing all your chips in right now for a Lowry.
It's a fair point. And I'm in a weird spot where I don't know if there's a wrong answer, because I think I understand the argument of Joel Embiid, he as great as he is, as dominant as he is, the history of big men in the NBA is not great. Especially he's got an injury history. I know he's in great, credit to him because he is in great shape. He's taken big steps to ensure that he can play as long as possible. But there's still that will always be in the back of my mind that, he's a big guy and he's had this injury history, but he's playing at his best. Ben Simmons right now is starting to peak. Tobias Harris is playing his best basketball. So I think there's an argument to be made that you kind of strike while the iron's hot and capitalize on the momentum you have, because the Nets are coming for you. And, that could be the difference. But I think I think you're raising excellent points as well, because I think the COVID thing is something that is very real. And you're right. All it takes is one positive test at the wrong time for everything to go south. We've seen that. Really, look at the Heat so far. I mean, their season has basically been destroyed because of how many guys they had out for so long. It basically has ruined their season up till now. Now they have a whole second half to make up for it, but if they're like a 6 seed in the playoffs, they are a dangerous 6 seed. But it still has affected them. So I think that's an excellent point you make as well. And if you do look at the roster, you can make an argument, and that's what I wrote on my piece, is that if you don't make that splash move, you could get George Hill, you could get PJ Tucker, and then maybe when the buyout market comes around, you could sign JJ Redick. So all of a sudden, you have so many options. And again, it's not about playing every single guy. It's about having the pieces that match up. If a wing is killing you, scoring all over you, you bring in Matisse Thybulle to shut him down. If you can't hit a shot, you bring in JJ Redick to jumpstart things and hit a couple shots, maybe run some DHOs with Joel Embiid to get him going. PJ Tucker, like we've already talked about, and his ability to play a 5. George Hill, can play on or off the ball, can kind of take some pressure off Shake Milton. So I think there is certainly an argument to be made that maybe this team, the best course is to just make a couple, small moves that are actually big upgrades that can kind of elevate the rest of the team, elevate the depth. Like you said, the starting 5 is not the problem. They have played very well. If there is one spot I think you can upgrade, it is the Danny Green spot. But with that said, I think Danny Green is better than a lot of people give him credit for. A lot of the little things he does as a veteran guy, he's played in championships, played with champion players and coaches. He knows what to expect, and he's a good example for the guys. He's a good leader. So that's not that you can't understate that. But yeah, I think we're going to wrap up there, man. But Kevin, I appreciate you so much coming on. For those of you who don't know, you can catch Kevin's work, my work, 97.3ESPN.com. Please, throw us a like, give us some views, and follow Kevin on Twitter. Kevin, do you want to shout out your Twitter handle real quick?
Yeah, Kevin MCC 973.
There it is. Kevin, thank you so much for coming on, man. I appreciate you.
Had a good time.
All right, man. I want to say I appreciate all you guys tuning in. Thank you guys so much. Please rate, download, subscribe, coming in for a landing wherever you see it, and I will talk to you next time.